She had never lost, and she had never bowed to an opponent. And by the end of that night in Hong Kong, she would do the second of those two things in front of 4,000 people who had come to watch her do the opposite. Her name was Reiko, and she was 28 years old, and she had built something rarer than an undefeated record. She had built a reputation for taking things away from people. 61 fights, 61 wins, and the number that mattered to her was not the wins but the fact that almost no one who lost to her ever fought seriously again. She did not simply beat opponents, she dismantled the belief that had brought them into the ring in the first place. The Japanese sporting press had given her a delicate nickname that she despised because there was nothing delicate about what she did, and she had spent 7 years making sure everyone who used it understood their mistake by the second round. She had come up through one of the hardest full-contact schools in Osaka, the kind where students were conditioned to take damage as a matter of course, where the training itself was designed to burn away anyone who had joined for the wrong reasons. By the time she was 21, she was the most feared fighter her style had produced in a decade, and by 28 she had stopped being invited to ordinary tournaments because promoters had learned that putting her on a card meant no one else wanted the second slot. She was not there to compete. She was there to end the idea that anyone could compete with her. In her mind, this was not cruelty, it was honesty. Respect, she believed, was not given. It was taken in front of witnesses, and it lasted precisely as long as no one stronger came along. On the 18th of November 1972, more than 4,000 people filled a sports hall in Hong Kong for an event billed as an international demonstration of martial arts. Masters of karate, kung fu, taekwondo, judo and muay thai had been brought together to show their styles to the public. There were no sanctioned fights on the card, no prize money, nothing at stake but reputation. It was meant to be an evening of exhibition and mutual respect, the kind of event that photographs well and offends no one. Reiko had agreed to appear because appearing cost her nothing, and because a room full of people watching her was a room she could own. Bruce Lee had agreed to appear because he wanted to talk about where martial arts was going and to show, without hurting anyone, what he meant when he spoke about speed and economy and the difference between motion and meaning. If you want to understand how an evening designed to avoid exactly this ended in a public confrontation, stay with this because it did not begin with him. It began with her deciding before he ever spoke what he was. She watched him from a doorway before the demonstrations began, surrounded by people who wanted photographs, signing things for children, easy and unhurried and entirely without the hardness she associated with real fighters. She folded her arms and said to one of her students that she had expected a fighter and had been sent a film star. The student, more careful than she was, mentioned that people said he was very fast. She answered that people believed movies and that they did not understand what real training cost, and she turned away. In her world, fighters collected scars, not admirers. A man who let children hang on his arms an hour before an exhibition was a man who had never had anything taken from him. She intended, though she had not yet decided it in so many words, to be the one who took something. The demonstrations ran for an hour. Men broke boards and shattered stacked tiles and drove elbows through bricks, and the audience applauded each feat, the way audiences applaud things that look difficult. When Bruce's name came over the loudspeakers, the hall changed register, a wave of noise that was different in kind from the polite appreciation that had come before. He walked out in a plain black uniform, no belt of rank, no title announced, and he bowed to the instructors seated around the floor, one after another, including the woman with her arms folded, who did not bow back. He noticed that she did not. He said nothing about it. His demonstration lasted only a few minutes, and its argument was quieter than everything that had preceded it. He said that speed without control was merely dangerous, and that power without purpose was merely noise, and then he showed a strike from a distance so short it should not have generated any force at all, and the volunteer who received it went backward off his feet. The hall came apart with sound. Everyone rose, almost everyone. She was already moving before the applause had crested. She walked onto the demonstration floor, with a microphone in her hand. and the announcer looked toward the officials, and the officials looked at one another, and no one moved to stop her, because stopping her would have required someone to decide they were willing to. She let the noise fall away, and into the silence she asked whether that was what passed for martial arts now. Bruce turned toward her, and he did not stop smiling, and he said that it was one way of expressing it. She laughed, loud enough to reach the upper gallery, and she pointed at him and said that what he did was not martial arts. It was theater, and the 4,000 people who had been cheering a moment earlier went quiet and uncomfortable because they could hear that she was not performing. She meant it. What she said next, she built like a staircase, each step higher than the last, each one harder to walk back from. She said he made actors believe they were fighters, and made children believe that speed mattered more than discipline. She said he sold dreams instead of building warriors. He answered every escalation the same way, with a short courtesy that refused to give her the anger she was reaching for, and each time he did it, her certainty hardened, because calm was the one response she had not been able to break in 7 years of breaking people. She stepped closer and told him that if he were a real martial artist he would fight her, and he shook his head gently and said he had not come to fight. She smiled at that, the cold smile of someone who has just been handed the thing they wanted, and she said the word convenient in a way that made it land like a slap. He told her he had come to share knowledge, that violence should be the last option and not the first. Some of the crowd applauded him. She waited for the applause to die, and then she took one more step, close enough now that the cameras caught both their faces in the same frame, and she said slowly that the famous Bruce Lee was only brave when the cameras were running. The hall drew a single breath. He did not move. She said he called himself a master, but was afraid of a woman, and she turned to his students in the crowd and told them they should leave, because tonight they would learn that their teacher was a performer and nothing more. If you want to see what finally moved him, because it was not any of the insults, stay with this. He closed his eyes for 1 second, and when he opened them, his expression had not changed, and he said quietly enough that the microphones barely caught it, that he would not fight out of pride, and would not fight because he had been insulted, and would only fight if there was something in it worth teaching. She heard the opening in that sentence, and drove through it. She raised her hand to the 4,000 people around her and shouted that if Bruce Lee refused this challenge, he should never again call himself a martial artist. And the hall detonated, and journalists came forward, and photographers climbed onto chairs, and for several long seconds he simply stood there while the noise broke over him. Then he reached up, removed his jacket, folded it once and set it on a chair beside the mat. He looked at her and he said 7 words, "I hope you are ready to learn." What almost no one in that hall understood, as they roared their approval, was that he had already been studying her for the better part of an hour, from the doorway and from the floor, and that the fight in his mind had started long before either of them stepped onto the mat. He came onto the mat barefoot, without hurry, the way a man walks into a room he has walked into 1,000 times. The referee stepped between them and said the words that were supposed to make this safe, a demonstration, no intentional injury, stopped the instant either fighter asked. She was not listening. Her eyes did not leave him. The referee asked them to bow. Bruce bowed deeply. She lowered her head, perhaps an inch, and the crowd saw it, and he saw it, and he said nothing. Before the referee could step clear, Bruce raised a hand and said plainly that they did not have to do this. She asked if he was frightened already. He said no, that he simply did not believe proving who was stronger would make either of them better. She told him he still had time to walk away. He said he would rather walk away than leave someone injured. And the referee lowered his arm, and she was already moving. She came without testing him, which told him something in the first half second, that she intended to end it fast, the way she ended everything. A spinning kick came at his head with no setup and no disguise, thrown at full speed by someone who had never needed to hide her intentions because her speed had always been enough. He did not block it. He leaned back and the kick passed close enough to move the air against his face, and he was already watching the way her hips reset, the way her weight came back down, the small mechanical truths that a fighter reveals only when they commit fully. She landed and attacked again, and again combinations that had finished dozens of fights, and none of it touched him, and he threw nothing back. This was the part the crowd could not read. They had come to see a fight, and what they were watching did not look like one. He was not countering. He was not even, as far as they could tell, trying to. He moved around her strikes with a margin so small it looked like luck the first time, and like something else entirely by the 10th. The whispering started in the cheap seats and spread. Why was he not attacking? Was he hurt? Was he afraid after all? Only an old kung fu master in the front row was smiling, and when the man beside him asked why, he said quietly that the small man was not fighting yet. He was reading. She was spending everything, and he had not yet spent anything at all. She felt it before the crowd understood it. She had spent 12 years able to locate any opponent, their balance, their rhythm, where they would be a half-second from now, and she could not locate this one. He was never where the strike was going, not far from it, just barely, precisely, infuriatingly not there. She threw harder, and the harder she threw, the less disciplined it became, which was exactly the thing he was waiting to see. A side kick finally caught him on the thigh, a real one, and the sound of it carried through the hall, and for the first time his leg registered the blow, and the crowd cheered. She told him, breathing harder now, that she had finally touched him. He nodded and said it was a good kick, and meant it, and told her that she was still teaching him, and the word teaching did more damage than the kick had, because she understood dimly that he was gathering something from her and giving nothing in return. Somewhere past the 5-minute mark he spoke, low enough that only she could hear it over her own breathing. He told her she had stopped fighting him 2 minutes ago and had been fighting her own anger ever since. She said through her teeth that she was fighting him. He shook his head, and the terrible thing was that she knew he was right, because she could feel it, the way her technique had come loose from her mind, the way each miss cost her a little more than the last. The crowd had changed. They no longer wanted to see her knock him down. They wanted to understand what they were looking at, this man who was controlling a fight he refused to participate in, who had not yet closed his hand. She stopped, 3 feet from him, chest heaving, and asked him the question the whole hall was thinking. Why would he not fight her? And he answered that he was. She said he had not even attacked, and he said that winning was not always striking, that sometimes it was understanding, and she looked at him with something that was no longer entirely anger. Then her pride closed over the opening, because she could not accept that answer in front of 4,000 people, and she dropped into the stance she had reserved her whole career for the end of fights, the one her own students rose from their seats when they saw. And for the first time all night his face went serious, because he had finally seen the last thing he needed to see. She launched everything she had left, faster than at any point in the fight, 3 techniques in under 2 seconds, and this time he did not move backward. He moved forward, into the space she believed was hers alone, closer than anyone had ever come, and her kick found nothing, and her strike found air, and her knee never arrived. He did not hit her. His lead hand touched her wrist and turned, his shoulder rotated a few degrees, his foot shifted inches, and her own committed momentum did the rest. She went past him, off balance, and caught herself, and he did not chase and did not strike. He simply let her recover and waited. She came once more with everything, shouting as she came, and he stepped inside it, and his open hand came to rest for half a second against her shoulder, with almost no weight in it at all, and her balance left her in a direction she had not chosen, and she went down to one knee on the mat, not hurt, not struck, placed there by physics she had spent 12 years mastering and had just watched used against her by a man who had never made a fist. She stayed on that knee for 2 seconds, and he was already crouching to her level, and he offered his hand. She looked at it. She asked, barely above her breath, why he was helping her. He said that if he had wanted to defeat her, he could have done it several minutes ago, and he brought her to her feet. And then, before the moment could settle, a single voice tore out of the crowd and screamed at him to finish her, and hundreds of voices joined it. Knock her out, end it, show them who is best. 4,000 people who a moment before had been silent were now demanding the one thing the entire fight had been an argument against. If you have watched this far, this is the part worth staying for, because it is the part the newspapers led with the next morning, and it was not the fight. He turned toward the crowd, and the disappointment on his face was plain, and he raised one hand until the hall went quiet. He told them they had come to watch martial arts, and that some of them were now asking to watch revenge, and that these were not the same thing. And the silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before it that night, because it was ashamed. He turned back to her. She was still standing where he had left her, her breath ragged, her certainty gone, and for the first time in a decade she did not know what came next. He did not lecture her. He said only that she had lost nothing tonight, and had gained something, and that there was one thing more dangerous than losing a fight, which was losing the ability to respect the person across from you, because the moment you stopped respecting others was the moment you stopped growing. He said she was extraordinarily talented, that she had trained her body for years, and that the opponent she had never learned to face was not standing on the mat at all. And she understood him, and her eyes filled, not because she had been beaten, because for the first time someone had reached past her body to the thing underneath it that she had never let anyone touch. She bowed, slowly, all the way down, deeper than she had ever bowed to any opponent in 61 fights, a bow she had spent her whole career refusing to give. He returned it exactly as deeply, without a trace of triumph, the way a man returns a gift. And the hall did not cheer the way crowds cheer a knockout. They applauded something quieter and larger than that, and the referee walked to the center of the mat, looked at both of them, and raised neither hand. There was no winner, he said, only two martial artists, and the applause that answered him went on longer than any that night. Afterward, a reporter asked Bruce why he had not finished her when he had the chance. He said his goal had never been to defeat her, only to help her become better. Another asked whether her insults had made him angry. He said that if another person's words could control your actions, they had already beaten you. Across the building, she sat alone in an empty locker room with her championship belt beside her, and for the first time it did not feel like the most important thing she owned. She went over the fight in her mind, every miss, every warning he had given her, and she had ignored, every opening he had chosen not to take, and she understood at last that he had not beaten her in that final exchange. He had beaten her the moment he chose to help her up instead of finishing her in front of 4,000 people who were begging him not to. She changed how she taught after that. The first thing her new students learned was no longer how to strike, it was how to bow. When they asked her why, she pointed at a photograph on the wall of two fighters standing side by side, both of them bowing, no belt or trophy between them, and she told them that she had once been undefeated, and that the most important thing she knew had been taught to her in a single evening by a man who could have broken her and chose to build her instead. And that, she would say, is the difference between a fighter and a master.